there's still an opportunity to speak in public. We still have radio stations that are not controlled by the Kremlin, despite the purge that we've seen in the mass media industry. And this question, liberals are to blame for everything, it often arises. So what's my personal conclusion? Sometimes it's useless to make any arguments, but sometimes there's still a chance to convince the audience that it's not all black and white. So why many believe that liberals are to blame? Simply because the 1990s have been a very difficult time, and many associate these years with liberals. And that seems to be a very close association in everybody's mind. Everyone seems to think that liberals are to blame for that painful transformation. And sometimes people think that we live so poorly because liberals are still in the power, because they're so entrenched in the top echelons and you can't kick them out. And these stereotypes are so strong in the public. It's very difficult to dissuade people. So what's my personal conclusion? I can't agree with that, as you may understand. And I think I've found some arguments. You know, there is a number of radio stations who do opinion polls for their audience. And if you compare the data from 2 years ago and today, there's still some progress. We've been able to convince people. So you can't just blame liberals for everything. Of course, the costs were too heavy for everyone. People don't differentiate between Gaidar, Chubais or Yavlinsky. They pile them up in one great category. They might have heard of the 500 days plan by Yavlinsky, but, well, they don't remember that Yabloko never was in power. They just say liberals are to blame. They were in the power. So it's next to impossible to convince people that it was not true. So I decided to use a different trick. When they say that currently the liberals are to blame for all the bad things, so I tell everyone, come on, we've had the same power for 15 years. And I say, look, forget about liberals. Let's look at the actions of the government. Are they liberal-minded or not? What is happening today? Is this a liberal policy or not a liberal one? And you just go into specifics. Next slide, please. Raising the tax burden. Is this a liberal policy? No, they say. But these are very clear illustrations. The tax burden is going up. The rules are tightening. It's not liberalism by any stretch of imagination. Stimulating the economy through the state contract to favor domestic producers. That's what's happening. The latest news update is that Russia has introduced its food embargo as a counter-sanction, and the government has now drafted an executive order to ban the imports of goods for contracts by the state. So that will be the second round of counter-sanctions. So it's not just a food embargo. So the state will not buy any foreign-made goods from the countries that introduce sanctions against Russia. Is that liberal? No. And now we see the revoking of licenses in the banking sector. Many banks have lost their licenses. They've been revoked by the central bank. I think it's non-liberal, that's too hasty. Then, the pension reform. Do you know that the state has expropriated the savings of millions of people of 1 year? Is that a liberal move? No. So a couple of specifics on the pension reform. Here's the most important thing. The funds that were supposed to go to the non-state pension funds have been confiscated. So it's clear expropriation of pension savings, and it's anti-liberal. Tightening rules on natural monopolies, the same as we had this year. The rules were set at a specific rate. It's a protectionist policy, but we've joined the WTO. It's counter-WTO. So it seems that we really care. And also the recycling tax on cars that are imported into Russia. Protectionism is on the rise, despite the fact that we've joined the WTO. So what's the conclusion? What is being done today is far from a liberal economic policy. Okay, so what kind of claims can you lay to liberals? Liberals have nothing to do with it. Now, so don't blame liberals today. So that's appealing to common sense. So there's so many stereotypes. People always point fingers. They say, come on, there's Alexei Kudrin. And I'll tell them, well, Alexei Kudrin has stepped down 2 years ago. So, over the past 2 years, I think we've been gaining ground, and more people realize it's not the liberals who are to blame. Well, of course, in terms of the 1990s, you can't convince people. They still believe that liberals are to blame. But they don't blame liberals any longer, at least those who listen to my arguments. So when we talk about liberalism in the economic policy, let's look at the commonalities and differences with European countries. We have conservatism and liberalism in Europe, but the economic policy is still more leaning towards liberal policies. And that's why the advanced European countries have a high-tech, highly developed economy. You might have more conservatism in politics, but the economy has always relied on liberal values. If you look at Russia, we have a move towards conservatism, and the authorities don't realize that. But they could face serious economic challenges because, well, sanctions have just become another stimulus, but not a big one, to make the situation worse. Russia was bound to move into a recession. We would get into a recession whether there were sanctions or not, so we shouldn't overestimate the role of sanctions. This recession was imminent due to this populist, inefficient policy. We just need to look at the GDP results over the 4 years. In August, we had a zero rate of GDP. So in 2012, 3.4, in 2011, 3.2. So we were moving down. This was a downward slope. So even in August, before the sanctions, before the tough sanctions, the growth rate was zero. So of course the government would tell us it's all due to sanctions, but actually it has nothing to do with sanctions. We were near the zero level. So the denial of liberalism in the economic policy will result in serious costs. The situation in the economy is deteriorating and it will degrade even further, but the authorities appear not aware of that. They don't know what to do, but there's little that can be done. The authorities are now victims of the populist decisions they took in the past couple of years. I don't think they fully realize that that raising the tax burden was wrong, but they can't do anything. For several years ago, they took up some commitments in terms of financing of the defense industry and the welfare state. You have to take the money somewhere, but the oil prices are down. So the Kremlin can't backpedal on their commitments and say we won't spend 20 trillion rubles on the defense industry. They will opt for more taxes, and that's anti-liberal. I wanted to present more information on taxes here, but it's very limited. There's more legislation. There's going to be property tax that will increase, and then we'll see more payroll taxes for hazardous industries. One of the latest updates. Here's the one for you. It's a draft bill that's been submitted to the Russian Parliament. Tariff rates for medical insurance. Compulsory medical insurance, 5.1%. It's a significant increase of the tax burden on employers. A significant increase, I repeat. So the priorities of Russia's fiscal policy are as follows. A 32% increase on defense. Expenditure on healthcare will decrease by 21%. So they hope to get some compensation through these new rates. So taxes are going up, despite the statements by the authorities, and that's anti-liberal. The fiscal policy is the key indicator of the nature of the policies. I won't mention all of the factors, all of the state fees, and the de-offshorization drive, and also the law enforcement will now get a chance to open criminal cases into tax violations. What does that mean? It means an anti-liberal move. It's a very tough one, clear one. Again, taxes will become the major focus for the government. So, as a wrap-up, it's been all very clear. There's a clear difference between what's happening here in Russia and in the West. There's less liberalism in the economic policy. Manual control is prevalent, while the economy becomes the one that is a mobilization economy type. So I liked one anecdote. It's Ed Hewitt from Brookings Institute. In the UK, there's a left-hand traffic, and they decided that they will switch to the European one and said, but we'll do it gradually. First the trucks, then the buses, and then only passenger traffic. So when you introduce some alien elements, so if it's the market economy, here's what could happen. And that's how it is being developed.